Today I'm going to go over my workflow for creating textures within Blender as an alternative approach for those who don't have Substance Painter like me. Anyway, here are the results. You can see some images on the screen. I've got two variants, a tan one and a black one, and it was really simple to create with the node setup I used. In today's overview, we're going to focus on creating materials with the baked mesh maps, or not mesh maps, baked maps from the high poly mesh, and creating effects from those like edge wear and yeah, things like that. And we're going to create procedural materials, semi-procedural, using some bitmaps, but create procedural materials to create a result to this effect. Anyway, this is going to be a time-lapse video. If you don't want to listen to me, just mute it and put on some music. And let's get started. So I'm starting off just stamping in some textures. I've got a normal map applied with a simple material, just yellow color so that I can see all the nice normal details. And here I'm creating a height map for the text that I'm going to stamp into the gun. And you can do this pretty easily just by taking the position of the geometry and then just plugging it through a color ramp node. And you see the setup down there in the bottom left. Anyway, now I'm just opening up the texture and setting it as a stencil, and then I can just paint in all this bump detail, and it really gives some extra realism with not too much work. So yeah, I'm just bumping in the serial number, and yeah, I think I've got all the bump details in. So now I'm just gonna have to touch up this one normal map error that I found. It's really not that hard, just take your smudge brush, you can do it right within Blender, and smudge all those colors around it till it kind of disappears. I didn't get it fully, I didn't fully clean it up, but you can't tell, so it doesn't matter in the end, as long as it looks nice. So here I'm creating my my base values, and it's important to set values for your color, roughness, and normal that look good even without all the extra details applied, because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be adding onto your base. So if your base looks bad, your material is going to look bad. No matter how many fingerprints and edge scratches you have, you need to have proper base values for the material that you're making. So I would recommend looking at the PBR encyclopedia. It can be found on Polycount. It's just some Google Doc of this guy who gathered all sorts of information into one. It's pretty useful. Anyway, here I'm creating some edge wear, which basically just takes the curvature, and then I've got the equation to isolate the edges up on a Blender artist thread. But anyway, I isolate the edges and then run it through my node with a bitmap to give variance to the edges. I test out my procedural edge wear too, which looks pretty good, but I think I'm going to change it a little bit before I decide to start using it in actual texturing, because the moose grave is a little bit too detailed. Too much of a fine grain. Anyway, now I'm bringing in all my effects that I made in that Blender artist thread I was talking about. And these are just presets that can really easily alter your material. So it'll take an image or something. And these all have been customly made so that it affects your material in the right way. Anyway, now I'm adding some scratches, and there's something wrong with my node group that I had to fix later. I just had to adjust one of the rotation values and it was perfectly fine. But you can see I multiplied one of the grunge textures over it with a tiled pretty high, just to give some variation in the scratches. You don't want anything to look too uniform. So that's another reason why I'm just adding some distortion within the node group itself. And then here you can see I subtract it from the bump, so that from the bump map, so that it looks indented just the slightest bit. You don't want it to be too dramatic. Everything needs to kind of be subtle. If it looks too deep, it'll just look fake. And then here you can see I'm checking out the normal output, and I decided not to have the edges affect the bump, because it kind of looked ridiculous having the edges be that indented. So I just kept it to scratches. Anyway, here I'm having my grunge, just affect the bump, giving it some variation. And then I'm running it some more of my effects nodes to alter the roughness and albedo channels. And you can see what it's doing. I just plug in the PBR maps that come before it, and then it outputs the new altered map, and then I can just plug that into the material output. And then for this final touch, I'm just kind of adding some fingerprints. And I've got a fingerprint generator blend file where you can generate a random fingerprint texture. I might link that into a Blender artist thread. If I do, I'll put it in the description. Anyway, here I'm just, altering the material, making sure that everything affects most channels, except for the normal. Not everything really has to affect the normal, otherwise you'll just get a super rough looking surface. So here I'm setting my base values for my frame, and again, it's important that it looks good with your base values, so you can see even with just this simple noise, it looks pretty decent. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a grunge texture to the roughness channel, and I think I may have slightly affected the color channel, but that'll just break up some of your reflections and give it a touch more realism. Anyway, yeah, now I'm just running some of my effect nodes through it. These effect nodes, they're really handy. They really speed things up because I could just input the maps and get an output map really quickly, and I can do a lot of testing things out. Where if I were to have to create everything manually again, it probably would take a lot longer, and I wouldn't have the ability to play with the values as much and test things out like I really want to. Anyway, I'm adding some scratches, changing the color ramp values so that scratches create more rough surfaces instead of more glossy surfaces, and then I'm having the smudges create more glossy surfaces so that it looks like you got some finger grease on there. And then I'm adding my procedural scratches node. This is where I end up fixing the scratches. You can see they're all kind of pointing inward, so I had to go into the node group and change one of the rotational values to 1080, I think I set it to. It was a real simple, easy fix. I'll update that in my scratches blend. But then what I'm doing is I'm just breaking them up, add some distortion to them, mask them off so there's not one for every tile. And then what I can do is I can combine like big scratches and little scratches just to give a more random look. And then I have that add to the roughness channel so that there's no glossiness in the roughness at those spots. And then you can also subtract that from the bump, and that'll give an indented rough look to your scratches, and will give it some more realism. And here you can see we've got a pretty good result so far, and we haven't really done anything too complex. We've just set our base values, maybe set like a base grunge texture for the base material, and then I run it through these effect nodes, which are really quite handy, And the thing about the effect nodes is they're not that hard to create. You just need to make sure when you're creating them, you think about how it should be applied intelligently. If you've got scratches, the scratches should obviously be more rough and indented. So you have to think about those kind of things when you're having them affect your normal channel and your roughness channel. And the color, it doesn't really matter, They could be brighter or darker. It all depends on what kind of material you have. And then here I'm having the curvature map, affect some of the albedo, and that'll make it look. That'll bring some of the high poly mesh detail into the low poly. And here I'm running through my edgeware node, I think. Yeah, something like that. Just give it some extra variation. Give it some more oomph from the high poly. And it's starting to look pretty good. So yeah, here I'm just, doing some color variations. I did end up creating a tan variation in the end. I looked at some reference because I couldn't get the tan color just quite right, but I think I got it in the end. So now that I've got my two base materials, I was testing out creating a metally material just to give some contrast between the blacks of the slide in the frame. But what ended up giving it that contrast was just creating a tan frame, which I think was more realistic than kind of trying to wing it. I was trying to wing this metal material here, I didn't have any reference for it, so it was kind of a bad idea, but it didn't take that long because I was just using my effect nodes. In the end, though, I just changed it back and I still got a good result, and that's really all that matters. But you can see here, I did get a decent metal material, although it didn't really fit the model. It was quite easy to create this material with with just these nodes. So I would highly recommend making your own node pack, or I might drop this one in the description. But anyway, I would more strongly recommend making your own so you really understand what's behind it, and you can use like, you know, when you're plugging it in, you know exactly how it's going to affect things. Anyway, here I'm just assigning materials because I've got my two materials that are basically over the whole gun. So I think I duplicated the slide material and just bumped up the albedo just to give it some more variation. And now you can see like the base materials are pretty much done. Now it's just about adding some extra detail. So what I've done is for the trigger, I'm adding those little grooves you can see on the left reference. I'll add those later. Actually, I'm adding them right now with a wave texture, which is pretty simple. And what you can do is you can add a RGB curves, which is in a lot of ways like the color ramp, but I think it's superior to the color ramp because you can, well, I mean, they both have their uses, but you can control the interpolation between the black value and the white value a little bit easier than just with the preset, you know, linear, B-spline, ease. But anyway, yeah, I'm creating the grooves that I'm going to use to plug into the bump, and that'll give us some extra detail. Yeah, and the nice thing about doing it this way is you don't have to hand paint anything, at least for like, for the most part, you know. Although you do have to hand paint, you know, those fine details like the logos and the text. But those aren't really hand painted, they're stenciled on, if you know what I mean. Anyway, now that I've got the normal worked out from the material, I can just duplicate one of the other materials and then pass it through a bump node in the material, and it gives the output nice and easy. So I didn't have to recreate this material at all. I just used that bump information from the test and plugged it in. And there you can see I created the pure black material, which is just a metal material with black roughness and black value. And then another thing is that slide material, I just duplicated it and changed out the tangent space normal map and curvature map, and it instantly conforms to your other meshes. You just need to change the input maps, and if you're creating materials this way, it should be really easy to use them from one asset to another. And then I had a couple crashes there. I was testing out texture painting. And now I'm going to be painting basically with multiple channels at once, you know, by masking. So I'm painting black in value, black roughness, and white in the metal channel. And that'll create like a pure black look, no reflections, so it kind of looks like there's holes in the magazine. And then here I'm trying to stamp on some numbers like the real Glock magazine has. But since I had mirrored UVs, that kind of came back to bite me because if I type it on one side, it's going to get mirrored to the other and it's going to get flipped. So if you're using mirrored UVs, I would suggest only using it where you're not going to have text. Otherwise, the text is going to be flipped and not look quite right. So what I did is I put text on one side of it, which even though it had mirrored UVs, I just didn't show it off in the render. So it was kind of a hack to get around that, but you can see on the other side it's completely illegible. Illegible. And then here I'm doing the same process, you know, setting base values for my material, and then I'll just run some of those effect nodes through them, you know, grunge, spots, smears, scratches. And then what I'm doing there is where I created the bump where it said government use restricted or whatever. I also had that affect the color channel just by using a mix RGB and using the mask. Just add the color to the material, and it'll quickly give some variance to the color in the text. And then here what I'm doing is I'm just doing the same thing, setting base values, running it through my effects nodes, you know, having them tile the right way or whatever, adjusting how much it affects each channel. And then I'm looking at reference to get the color right. It's really important to look at reference. Like the times where I didn't look at reference in this, like when I was trying to create the metal on the barrel, that like the white shiny glossy metal, it just didn't look right, and it was better just to go back to the reference and, you know, do it the right way. So here I'm just duplicating the material and changing the base color, and boom, that material's done. Very easy. So the system is quite powerful and quite flexible. You don't have to do a lot of you do have to do a lot of work of creating the materials, but once you've got the material, you can just reuse it in pretty much anything you want. Just change out the normal map, the curvature maps, and the like if you're using AO to generate dirt or something, you would just change out the AO app, and it should just conform to pretty much any object you throw at it. But obviously, the materials are going to look better if your high poly looks better. Your materials won't ever look right. Like, no, if we were to throw this on without the normal map, it would look pretty bad. So it's important that you have a clean high poly so you can get a clean bake. So here, yeah, I'm just creating the rear sight colors. I don't know what to call it. Anyway, I'm creating that in GIMP. I ended up just painting it in Blender and then kind of adjusting the final map in GIMP, which I think is kind of a better workflow. But I'm testing things out here. I'm still not 100% an expert at texturing, but over the course of these past like 3 projects, I think I've gotten quite a bit better, with this Glock probably being the best one so far. The MP5 was really good, but it took just a crap ton of time. It took me like, I don't know, probably 5 days to finish that. Maybe like a week. I don't know, but it took a lot of time because I didn't have any of these. I didn't have these node libraries where I could just plug things in and then quickly add variation. And then with my M1911, I just didn't follow reference closely enough. I ended up creating a black metal material, which, I mean, if you have read the PBR encyclopedia or whatever, it's just the Google Doc. It's not really an encyclopedia. I mean, I guess it is, but it's not one of those thick textbook type encyclopedias. Anyway, if you've read that, a true metalness. If you have a metalness value of 1, your albedo should not be anywhere below 0.7 in value or something like that. It's pretty interesting, and I kept some of that in mind while creating these materials. So it's important to stay true to the properties of the material in real life. So you shouldn't have any metals that are pure black. You shouldn't have any dielectrics that are 100% white. You should always use kind of an off-white. So what I'm doing here is even though I'm at least I'm pretty sure, even though I've got it painted white in GIMP or whatever, when you add it to the color map using the mix RGB, you can just set it to 0.9 or something, or 0.8, and that'll give you a good value. And then here what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint with multiple channels at once effectively using a mask, similar to how you could do it in Substance Painter. So I'm just going to go into texture paint mode, mask out the faces that I want, and then there, I just do a little circle and you can see it changed all channels at once. Pretty much it changed the albedo to green, changed the roughness to something more glossy, and it didn't change the normal. I mean, I guess it did. It took away the noise, but it changed the normal channel to just the normal map and no bump map influence. And here you can see I ran into a problem with Eevee's texture limitation, which is honestly quite annoying that you can't have more than 24 textures or whatever it is. But to get around that, what I did is I just I made more effective utilization of the nodes that I had. So anywhere where I had the same normal map plugged in twice, I would just make sure it was using 1 input, and then I dumbed down the material for those little screws or whatever that are in the frame, so that it didn't need as many image textures. And here what I'm doing is I'm going into the GIMP, opening my normal map and then masking out that little grip thing where the noise is significantly larger than the rest of the frame. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask between the small noise and the large noise, so that the grip will have large noise and the rest of the frame will just have that small noise. So what I was doing is I was just using the magic wand, or fuzzy select as it's called in GIMP, and basically trying to select the whole crap, I forget what you call it, the whole grip. And then what I was doing is I was subtracting the selection that uses the regular normal map color, which is just 0.5 red, 0.5 green, 100% blue. Subtract that color and it should leave you with a mask of only the colors that you need, but you're gonna have to subtract out all of the other parts that you have selected. And then here you can see I'm using it to mix between these two noises to give a result that looks quite realistic, I think, you know. And that was fairly simple to do. I could have painted it right inside of Blender, but I think it was probably more accurate just to go in GIMP and trace it out. And here I was running into the problem with the pink textures in Eevee, so I decided to you know, to check if the new material was the problem, and it was. So I just ended up dumbing down the slide material for the parts that, or for the screws in the frame. Alternatively, yeah, I could have just baked it, and baked the frame material, and then mixed between the. I could have baked both materials. I could have baked the frame and the slide to the frame, and then mixed between them using the same mask. That might have been a better option, but it would have been more work, and I was trying to get through to the end of this by now at this point. And there you can see I've finished up. I did make some changes off video, but all the same concepts were used, you know, simple masking, starting with effective base materials, you know, make sure you really have those values set to something true to life. And then once you've got all your base materials done, you know, like with just a very basic grunge or noise texture to give some variance to it, then you can start layering on the effects, you know, like scratches and edge wear and smears and things like that. And you can really have it affect the roughness channel quite heavily. That'll give a lot of variation to your it'll give a lot of variation to your model and just make it really pop, you know, when the light hits it, and you can see all those different angles. Anyway, I'll make sure to link all the stuff in the description, you know, the encyclopedia, or the PBR encyclopedia, the Blender artist thread about, you know, creating these effects. Anything else? Yeah, I'll just link it in the description, so make sure to check the description. I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching till the end, and see ya.